From broken to beautiful, how a divorced mother discovered love that honors her worth. Chapter 1, The Weight of Freedom. Some women discover their worth when a man builds them up. Deja McClain discovered hers when she finally had the courage to walk away from the man who tried to tear her down. The marble foyer of what had been her home for 15 years stretched before her like a museum of memories she was ready to leave behind. Sunlight streamed through the crystal chandelier, casting rainbows across moving boxes labeled in her careful handwriting: Deja's office, Jordan's room, kitchen, essentials only. Each box represented a piece of her life she was reclaiming, one decision at a time. The sound of bubble wrap crackling around picture frames filled the air as movers wrapped away 15 years of her marriage. Deja stood perfectly still in the center of the chaos, her posture straight, her expression composed. But anyone looking closely would have noticed the slight trembling in her hands as she removed her wedding ring, a 2-carat diamond that had once symbolized forever but now felt like a beautiful prison. She didn't throw it away. That would have been too easy, too dramatic. Instead, she placed it carefully in a small velvet jewelry box, choosing to remember the lesson, not the pain. The weight of the ring had become heavier with each passing year, not because of the gold, but because of what it represented: promises broken, trust shattered, and love that had slowly transformed into control. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Jordan's voice carried the uncertainty of a 15-year-old caught between childhood and the adult world he was suddenly forced to navigate. Standing in the doorway with shoulders that carried too much weight for someone so young, Jordan looked between the packed boxes and his mother's face, searching for reassurance in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. Deja turned toward her child, her expression softening with the kind of love that had sustained her through the darkest moments of her marriage. "I'm sure, baby. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose peace over familiarity." The divorce papers lay on the marble countertop, signed and notarized, legally ending what had emotionally died years ago. But the real ending had come 3 months earlier, when Julian had stood in this very foyer and told her she was nothing without him, that she'd never survive on her own, that she was too emotional to make rational decisions about their business or their child. That night, she'd stood in front of their bathroom mirror and asked herself a question that would change everything. When did you start believing him? Now, watching the movers carry away furniture that had never really felt like hers, Deja felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the intoxicating sensation of breathing freely. No more walking on eggshells, wondering if her success would threaten Julian's ego. No more pretending not to notice when he forgot to mention important business meetings or when he dismissed her ideas in front of their colleagues. No more lying awake at night wondering if the man beside her was planning her emotional destruction. The cost of her freedom had been steep. Julian had made sure of that. In the divorce settlement, she'd given up half of the investment firm they'd built together, the firm where her financial strategies had generated 70% of their revenue. He'd kept the house, the vacation properties, most of their shared accounts. But what he couldn't take was her mind, her talent, or her ability to rebuild from nothing. The same way she'd done once before, when she was a small-town girl with big dreams and a brilliant understanding of how money could work for people instead of against them. "Mrs. McClain?" The moving supervisor approached with a clipboard, his voice gentle. "We're ready for the last load. Just need your signature." As she signed her name, just Deja McClain now, not Mrs. Julian McClain, she felt the weight of possibility settling on her shoulders. At 44, she was starting over, but this time she was starting with something she'd never had before: the knowledge of her own worth. The sound of Julian's BMW pulling into the driveway made her stomach tighten reflexively, a response trained by years of his unpredictable moods. But when he walked through the door, she didn't shrink. She stood taller. "I see you're really doing this," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment mixed with condescension. Even in defeat, Julian McClain commanded attention. At 44, he was still the same man who'd swept her off her feet 20 years ago: charming, successful, confident. But now she could see what she'd missed then: the way his confidence required diminishing others, the way his charm was a tool for control. "I'm doing what I should have done years ago," she replied, her voice steady despite the way her heart raced. "I'm choosing myself." Julian's laugh was bitter. "Choosing yourself? Deja, you're 44 years old with a teenage child and half a business. You think you're going to find some fairy tale out there? You think there's a line of men waiting to take care of someone else's problems?" Jordan stepped closer to his mother, and Deja felt a surge of protective fury. Not at Julian's words about her, she was beyond caring about his opinion of her future, but at the way he spoke as if Jordan was a burden, a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. "Jordan isn't a problem," she said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of steel that had made her one of the most feared financial strategists in the city. "And neither am I." For a moment, something flickered in Julian's eyes, maybe regret, maybe recognition of what he was losing. But it passed quickly, replaced by the familiar mask of superiority. "You'll be back. When the real world hits you, when you realize that your idealistic fantasies don't pay the bills, you'll come back." "No, Julian. I won't." "When did you realize that the person who promised to cherish you was slowly stealing pieces of your soul?" For Deja, it had been a gradual awakening, like watching the sun rise, first just a hint of light, then slowly, inevitably, the full illumination of truth. After the movers left and Julian had gone back to whatever life he was building without her, Deja stood in the empty foyer one last time. The house felt larger without her belongings, but also somehow smaller, as if it had been holding its breath along with her. Jordan appeared beside her, slipping a hand into hers. "Are you scared, Mom?" Deja squeezed her child's hand, feeling the truth of her answer in her bones. "No, baby. For the first time in years, I'm not scared. I'm free." If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. Chapter 2, Rising from the Ashes. 6 months after the divorce, Deja McClain had transformed her pain into power. The small office suite she'd rented in downtown Atlanta hummed with the energy of new beginnings. McClain Financial Strategies was etched on the glass door in elegant script, a declaration of independence that still made her smile every time she saw it. The morning sun streamed through her corner office windows, illuminating the vision board she'd created, not of material possessions, but of the life she was building. Pictures of Jordan's artwork, articles about sustainable investment strategies, and a single photo of her mother, who'd taught her that a woman's worth wasn't measured by the man beside her but by the strength she carried within. "Mom, you're doing that thing again," Jordan said, looking up from homework spread across the small conference table. At 15, Jordan had developed an uncanny ability to read his mother's moods, a skill born from years of navigating the emotional minefields of his parents' failing marriage. "What thing?" Deja asked, though she already knew. She'd been staring at her computer screen for 10 minutes, lost in thoughts about the presentation she was giving that afternoon to a group of investors interested in affordable housing development. "That thing where you look like you're planning to take over the world." Deja laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in the months since the divorce. "Maybe I am. Would that be so bad?" "Not bad. Just different. Before, you always looked like you were trying to prove something. Now you look like you already know." The wisdom in Jordan's observation struck her. Her child was right. For years, she'd been trying to prove her worth, to Julian, to their business partners, to herself. Now, she was simply living it. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. "McClain Financial Strategies, this is Deja." "Mrs. McClain?" "This is Rebecca Scott from the Sustainable Communities Foundation. We spoke yesterday about your presentation for our investors' meeting?" "Yes, of course. I'm looking forward to it. Well, that's why I'm calling. We had a last-minute addition to the panel. George Edwards from Edwards Architecture will be presenting his housing development project. I thought you should know, since your financial strategies will be directly supporting his vision. Deja made notes as they spoke, but her mind was already shifting into the mode that had made her legendary in financial circles, the ability to see not just numbers, but the human stories behind them. A housing development wasn't just about profit margins and return on investment. It was about families having safe places to call home, about communities that supported growth rather than just existence. After hanging up, she spent the rest of the morning preparing, but not in the way she used to. Before the divorce, she would have obsessed over every detail, worried about impressing everyone in the room, second-guessed her expertise. Now, she prepared with the confidence of someone who knew her worth wasn't determined by others' opinions. The afternoon found her standing in the conference room of the Sustainable Communities Foundation, a space designed to inspire with its floor-to-ceiling windows and natural wood finishes. The room buzzed with conversation as investors, developers, and community leaders gathered around the polished table. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rebecca Scott began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years bringing visionary projects to life, "thank you for joining us today. We're here to discuss a project that could transform how we think about affordable housing, not as charity, but as investment in our community's futures." Deja felt the familiar thrill of being in a room full of people who understood that money was a tool for change, not just accumulation. These weren't the stuffy boardrooms where Julian had tried to silence her voice. This was her element. Our first presenter is George Edwards from Edwards Architecture. George has designed sustainable communities from Seattle to Miami, and his vision for our Atlanta project is nothing short of revolutionary. The man who stood up commanded attention not through arrogance, but through quiet confidence. George Edwards was tall, with the kind of presence that suggested strength without aggression. His silver-touched hair caught the afternoon light, and when he smiled, it reached his eyes in a way that suggested he found genuine joy in his work. "Thank you, Rebecca," he said, his voice carrying the slight roughness of someone who'd spent years on construction sites before moving to boardrooms. "I appreciate the opportunity to share this vision with you." As he began his presentation, Deja found herself leaning forward, genuinely interested in what he had to say. Too often, developers talked about affordable housing as if it were a necessary evil, a box to check for tax incentives. George Edwards spoke about it as if it were a calling. "Architecture shapes lives," he said, clicking through slides that showed beautifully designed homes that looked nothing like the typical low-income housing developments. "When we design communities that people are proud to call home, we're not just building houses. We're building hope." The numbers he presented were impressive, but what struck Deja was how he connected the financial projections to human impact. This wasn't just about return on investment, it was about creating places where children could grow up with dignity, where families could build generational wealth, where communities could thrive. When it was her turn to present, Deja stood with the poise of someone who'd learned to trust her own expertise. "Mr. Edwards has painted a beautiful picture of what's possible," she began, her voice carrying the warmth that had made her clients trust her with their most important financial decisions. "My job is to show you how we can make it profitable." She walked them through the financial strategies that would make George's vision sustainable, not just environmentally, but economically. Tax incentives, community investment funds, innovative financing structures that would allow families to build equity from day one. The numbers were complex, but she made them accessible, painting a picture of financial success that aligned with social impact. "The question isn't whether we can afford to build these communities," she concluded, meeting the eyes of each investor in the room. "The question is whether we can afford not to." The room erupted in questions, comments, and the kind of animated discussion that signaled real interest. As the meeting broke up into smaller conversations, Deja found herself approached by several investors eager to discuss the details of her financial projections. "Ms. McLean?" The voice was warm, with a slight roughness that she recognized. She turned to find George Edwards standing beside her, his hands clasped behind his back in a way that suggested patience rather than nervousness. "Mr. Edwards. Your presentation was inspiring. It's rare to meet a developer who sees housing as more than just square footage and profit margins." His smile was genuine, reaching those warm brown eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. "Thank you. And your financial strategy, it's brilliant. You found a way to make social responsibility profitable without compromising either element." Something in his tone made her pause. She was used to compliments from business associates, but they usually felt calculated, designed to soften her up for negotiations. George Edwards spoke like someone who genuinely appreciated expertise when he saw it. "You sound surprised," she said, studying his face for the subtle signs of condescension she'd learned to recognize. "Not surprised. Impressed. There's a difference." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've worked with a lot of financial advisors over the years. Most of them see affordable housing as a necessary evil, something to tolerate for the tax benefits. You see it as an opportunity." The conversation was interrupted by Rebecca Scott, who approached with the energy of someone who just witnessed something extraordinary. "George, Deja, that was exactly what we hoped for. The investors are excited, the community representatives are on board, and I think we might actually have something special here." As the meeting wound down and people began to leave, Deja gathered her materials with the satisfaction of work well done. She'd presented her ideas clearly, answered every question with confidence, and felt the familiar thrill of knowing she'd created something valuable. "Ms. McLean?" George's voice stopped her as she reached for her briefcase. "I hope this isn't presumptuous, but I wondered if you might be free for coffee sometime this week. I'd love to discuss some of the financing structures you mentioned in more detail." The request was professional, his tone respectful, but something in his eyes suggested genuine interest, not just in her ideas, but in her perspective. It had been so long since someone had looked at her that way, with curiosity rather than calculation. "I'd like that," she said, surprised by how much she meant it. "My schedule is fairly flexible this week." As they exchanged business cards, their fingers brushed briefly, a moment so fleeting it might have been accidental, but the way her skin tingled suggested otherwise. She pulled her hand back, not from rejection but from surprise at her own reaction. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said, and something in his voice suggested he was looking forward to it. Driving home through Atlanta traffic, Deja found herself replaying the afternoon. Not just the successful presentation or the interested investors, but the way George Edwards had listened to her ideas as if they mattered, the way he'd spoken to her as an equal rather than trying to impress or diminish her. Have you ever had to choose between your peace and keeping others comfortable? Share your story in the comments. This community is here to support you. At home, Jordan was sprawled across the living room floor, homework spread around him like fallen leaves. The apartment Deja had rented was smaller than their old house, but it felt bigger somehow, filled with air she could breathe freely. "How was the big presentation?" Jordan asked without looking up from his chemistry homework. "Good. Really good, actually." Deja settled into the comfortable chair she'd bought for herself, the first piece of furniture she'd chosen based solely on what she wanted, not what would impress visitors or match Julian's taste. "You sound surprised." "Not surprised. Just grateful, I guess." Jordan looked up then, studying his mother's face with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read emotional weather patterns. "You look different. Happy different, not just relieved different." It was true. For months after the divorce, Deja had felt relief from constant criticism, relief from walking on eggshells, relief from pretending to be smaller than she was. But today felt different. Today felt like possibility. "I met someone today," she said carefully, watching Jordan's expression. "A business colleague. An architect working on the housing project." Jordan's eyebrows rose with the keen interest of a teenager who'd been hoping his mother might eventually discover life beyond work and parenting. "Someone interesting?" Someone who listened to my ideas as if they mattered. The simplicity of that statement carried the weight of years of experience with Julian, who'd gradually trained her to present her ideas tentatively, apologetically, as if she were asking permission to be brilliant. That's a low bar, Mom. Maybe. But it's a start. That night, after Jordan had gone to bed, Deja sat in her small home office, reviewing the presentation materials one more time. But her mind kept drifting to the moment when George Edwards had asked about her financing strategies, the way he'd leaned forward slightly as if he didn't want to miss a single word. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the business card he'd given her. Edwards Architecture. The logo was elegant but not pretentious, the contact information straightforward. No embossed gold lettering or expensive cardstock designed to intimidate, just solid, understated quality. Tomorrow, he would call about coffee. It was business, of course. Professional collaboration. But as she prepared for bed, Deja found herself wondering what it would be like to have a conversation with a man who seemed more interested in her thoughts than in proving his own superiority. The last thing she did before turning off the light was look at her vision board. Tomorrow, she would add another picture, not of George Edwards, but of the feeling she'd had today. The feeling of being seen, heard, and valued for exactly who she was. Chapter 3. 3 days later, Deja found herself sitting across from George Edwards in a small cafe that specialized in fair trade coffee and locally sourced pastries. The choice of venue said something about him, not flashy or expensive, but thoughtful, supporting businesses that aligned with his values. "Thank you for making time for this," he said, wrapping his hands around a ceramic mug that looked small against his palm. "I've been thinking about your presentation since Tuesday. It was my pleasure. I don't often get to work on projects that feel this meaningful." The morning light streaming through the cafe windows caught the silver in his hair, and Deja noticed the way his hands moved when he spoke, architect's hands, precise but expressive, used to shaping ideas into tangible forms. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who'd been wondering about something for days. "Your financial strategy for the housing project, it's brilliant, but it's also risky. Most advisors would have suggested a more conservative approach. What made you willing to think outside traditional parameters?" The question revealed more about him than about her. Julian would have asked why she'd taken such risks, implying criticism. George Edwards asked what had made her willing to take them, suggesting admiration for her courage. Because conservative approaches to affordable housing are why we still have housing crises in major cities, she said, stirring honey into her tea. If we keep doing what we've always done, we'll keep getting what we've always gotten. Which is warehousing poor people in developments that look like prisons and calling it compassion. The passion in her voice surprised her. This was what happened when someone actually listened to her ideas. They grew, expanded, became more than just financial projections. "You sound like someone who's thought about this for a long time." "I grew up in subsidized housing," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "Beautiful, dignified homes designed by architects who understood that where you live shapes how you see yourself. I know what good housing can do for a family." Something shifted in George's expression, not pity, which she would have hated, but understanding. "And you've never forgotten?" "Never wanted to." They talked for 2 hours, their conversation flowing from housing policy to sustainable design to the intersection of social justice and economic viability. George listened to her ideas with the kind of focused attention that made her feel heard in ways she'd forgotten were possible. "I have to ask," he said as they prepared to leave, "are you always this passionate about your work?" "Only when it matters." "And this matters?" She paused, considering not just the project but the conversation they just shared, the way he'd challenged her thinking without dismissing her expertise, the way he'd built on her ideas rather than competing with them. "Yes. This matters." Walking back to her car, Deja felt energized in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. She'd spent 2 hours talking with someone who understood that business could be a force for good, someone who saw her expertise as an asset rather than a threat. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyra. How was the coffee meeting with the architect? Purely professional, I'm sure. Deja smiled as she typed back, it was enlightening. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting right now. But as she drove back to her office, Deja found herself thinking about George Edwards in ways that had nothing to do with financing structures or construction timelines. The way he'd laughed when she'd made a joke about bureaucratic red tape. The way he'd asked follow-up questions that showed he'd been really listening. The way he'd said her name, not Ms. McLean with professional distance, but Deja with warmth and genuine interest. It had been so long since a man had looked at her as if she were worth knowing rather than worth possessing. That afternoon, she threw herself into work with renewed energy, crafting detailed financial projections for the housing project and researching innovative funding mechanisms used in other cities. But underneath her professional focus was a humming awareness that she was working on something that mattered to someone who mattered to her. The realization stopped her cold. George Edwards mattered to her. After 2 conversations and a morning of coffee, this man she barely knew had somehow become important in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. At home that evening, Jordan noticed immediately. You're glowing. I'm not glowing. I'm productive. There's a difference. Mom, you're humming while you're cooking dinner. You haven't hummed in years. Jordan was right. She had been humming, an old jazz standard her mother used to play while cooking Sunday dinners. The melody had surfaced from some forgotten corner of her heart, along with a lightness she'd thought was lost forever. I had a good day at work. Because of the architect? Sometimes Jordan's perceptiveness was inconvenient. Because of the project. It's meaningful work. And the architect has nothing to do with that? Deja turned from the stove to study her child's face. At 15, Jordan was developing an adult's understanding of human nature, but still had a teenager's curiosity about their mother's emotional life. Mr. Edwards is a collaborator. A professional contact. Who makes you hum? Jordan. I'm just saying, it's nice to see you happy. Not just okay, not just managing, but actually happy. That night, after Jordan had gone to bed, Deja sat in her bedroom with a cup of tea and allowed herself to examine the feelings she'd been avoiding all day. George Edwards had stirred something in her that she'd thought was permanently dormant, not just attraction, though there was that, but something deeper. Interest. Curiosity. The desire to know someone better. It was terrifying. For 20 years, she'd been half of a couple. First dating Julian, then engaged to him, then married to him. Even during the worst years of their marriage, her identity had been tied to being Julian's wife, Jordan's mother, part of a family unit. The divorce had given her freedom, but it had also left her unmoored, unsure of who she was as a woman rather than just a mother and businesswoman. Now, thinking about George Edwards, she felt the stirring of desires she'd buried so deeply she'd forgotten they existed. The desire to be known, not just as a professional or a parent, but as a woman. The desire to share her thoughts with someone who found them interesting rather than threatening. The desire to build something beautiful with someone who saw her as an equal partner rather than a useful accessory. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Deja, this is George Edwards. I wanted to thank you again for this morning. Your insights were exactly what the project needed. I hope we can continue the conversation soon. She stared at the message for a long moment, her heart beating faster than seemed reasonable for such a professional communication. But there was something in the phrasing, continue the conversation, that suggested he'd enjoyed their time together as much as she had. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, thank you, George. I look forward to it. Simple, professional, giving nothing away. But as she set the phone aside, she was smiling. For the first time in years, she was looking forward to tomorrow. Chapter 4. 2 weeks later, the Sustainable Communities Foundation hosted their annual fundraising gala at the High Museum of Art. Deja stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the deep burgundy dress she'd chosen, elegant but not trying too hard, professional but undeniably feminine. On her right hand, she wore her wedding ring, transformed from a symbol of marriage into armor against vulnerability. "You look beautiful, Mom," Jordan said from the doorway, dressed for their own evening plans with friends. "Different beautiful than you used to look." "Different how?" "Before, you looked beautiful but sad. Like you were wearing a costume. Tonight you look like you." The observation struck her with its simple truth. For years, she'd dressed to please Julian's idea of what a successful businessman's wife should look like. Tonight, she dressed to please herself. The High Museum glittered with Atlanta's social elite, philanthropists and business leaders gathered to support sustainable development initiatives. Deja moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who belonged, not because of her husband's connections but because of her own expertise. Deja. Rebecca Scott appeared beside her, radiant in a way that suggested the evening was exceeding expectations. "I'm so glad you're here. The response to our housing project has been incredible. 3 more investors committed just this week." As they spoke, Deja's attention was caught by a familiar figure across the room. George Edwards stood near the silent auction displays, engaged in conversation with a group of potential donors. He wore a well-tailored black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, but what drew her attention was his posture, relaxed, attentive, genuinely interested in whatever his companions were saying. "Excuse me," she told Rebecca, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully understand. She approached the silent auction table where George stood studying the items up for bid. Beautiful photography, vacation packages, dinner experiences at Atlanta's finest restaurants. But it was the architectural drawings that had captured his attention, original blueprints from renowned architects who'd shaped the city's skyline. "See something you like?" she asked, joining him at the table. He turned with a smile that reached his eyes. "Several things, actually. But I'm trying to decide between these Frank Lloyd Wright sketches and..." He gestured toward another display. "This." She followed his gesture to a collection of photographs showing children playing in beautifully designed public spaces, parks, playgrounds, and community centers that transformed neighborhoods from mere collections of buildings into actual communities. "The photographs," she said without hesitation. "Why?" "Because the right sketches are beautiful, but those photographs show the impact of beautiful design on real lives. They're not just art, they're evidence of what's possible." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition that sparked between them like static electricity. "That's exactly what I was thinking." Their conversation was interrupted by the auction announcer calling for final bids, but neither of them moved away from the table. Instead, they found themselves reaching for the same bid paddle simultaneously, their fingers brushing as they both tried to increase the bid on the photography collection. The contact was brief, just fingertips touching for a moment, but it sent awareness shooting up Deja's arm like lightning. She looked up to find George's eyes fixed on her face, his expression suggesting he'd felt it too. "Sorry," she murmured, pulling her hand back. "Don't be." The 2 words carried more weight than they should have, spoken in a voice that had dropped to something just above a whisper. For a moment, the gala faded around them, the conversation, the music, the glittering crowd, until it was just the 2 of them standing close enough to share secrets. "Deja, there you are." Tyra Stokes appeared beside them with the timing of someone who'd been watching from across the room. Elegant in black silk, Tyra carried herself with the confidence of a woman who'd built a successful law practice on her ability to read people and situations. "I was hoping to meet your collaborator." "Tyra Stokes," Deja said, grateful for the interruption and annoyed by it in equal measure. "This is George Edwards." "George, my best friend and attorney, Tyra." George extended his hand with the kind of respectful attention that suggested he understood Tyra's importance in Deja's life. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Deja speaks of you often. All good things, I hope, Tyra replied, her lawyer's instincts clearly assessing this man who'd captured her friend's attention. Always. As the evening progressed, Deja found herself drawn into conversations with potential investors, community leaders, and fellow philanthropists. But she remained acutely aware of George's presence, the way he moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, the way he listened to people as if their opinions mattered. During dinner, they were seated at the same table, a coincidence Rebecca later admitted was entirely intentional. The conversation flowed around topics of sustainable development, community investment, and the intersection of profit and social responsibility. But underneath the professional discussion, Deja felt a current of awareness that had nothing to do with business. George asked her opinion on everything from tax incentive structures to community engagement strategies, but his questions felt different from the usual networking conversations. He asked as if he genuinely wanted to know what she thought, as if her perspective could change his understanding of the issues. You mentioned growing up in subsidized housing, he said during a lull in the broader conversation. Was that here in Atlanta? Small town in South Georgia. Valdosta. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us housed, fed, and dreaming big. She sounds remarkable. She was. She taught me that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go, but you should never forget the journey. Is that why affordable housing matters so much to you? The question was personal, deeper than typical dinner conversation, but his tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than polite small talk. Partly. But also because I know what it feels like to live in a place that was designed without love. Where the architecture itself told you that you didn't matter, that you were just something to be warehoused until you could afford something better. George nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. And now you're in a position to create something different. We're in a position to create something different. The emphasis on "we" was intentional, and the way his expression brightened suggested he'd caught it. I like the sound of that. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Deja found herself lingering near the museum's entrance, reluctant to let the night end. The silent auction had concluded with George winning the photography collection, but he'd immediately donated it back to the foundation to be displayed in the lobby of their new housing development. That was a lovely gesture, she said as they stood together in the museum's marble foyer. It seemed like the right thing to do. Besides, I realized I was bidding on it for the wrong reasons. Which were? I wanted something that would remind me of tonight. The honesty in his admission made her breath catch. They were standing close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to notice the way his voice had dropped to something intimate and warm. George. I know this is probably inappropriate, he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who'd been wrestling with something all evening. I know we're supposed to be professional colleagues, and I don't want to complicate the project or make you uncomfortable. But I can't pretend that business is the only reason I enjoy spending time with you. The words hung between them like a bridge she could choose to cross or leave unbuilt. Her practical mind catalogued all the reasons to maintain professional distance. They were working together, she was still rebuilding her life after divorce, she'd sworn off romantic complications until she was fully healed. But standing there in the soft light of the museum foyer, looking into the eyes of a man who'd spent the evening treating her intelligence as an asset rather than a threat, who'd listened to her ideas as if they mattered, who'd asked about her past as if he truly wanted to understand her journey, her heart overruled her mind. It's not inappropriate, she said quietly. And you're not making me uncomfortable. I'm not. You're making me nervous in the best possible way. His smile transformed his entire face, and she realized she'd never seen him look truly relaxed until this moment. I was hoping you'd say something like that. Were you? I've been wanting to ask you to dinner since that first coffee meeting. Dinner that has nothing to do with business. Dinner where we talk about books and travel and what makes us laugh instead of tax incentive structures and construction timelines. The invitation was exactly what she'd been hoping for and exactly what terrified her. Dinner meant crossing a line from professional collaboration to personal interest. It meant acknowledging that whatever was building between them was worth exploring. "I'd like that," she said, surprised by how much she meant it. "Are you free Friday night?" "I'll make sure I am." As they walked to their cars, Deja felt something she hadn't experienced in years, anticipation for something that had nothing to do with work or responsibility. For the first time since her divorce, she was looking forward to an evening that would be about pleasure rather than obligation, about discovering someone new rather than managing someone familiar. "Deja?" George paused beside his car, keys in hand. "Thank you for tonight. Not just for coming to the gala, but for being, you. Thank you for noticing." Driving home through the quiet Atlanta streets, Deja caught herself humming again, the same jazz standard that had been surfacing more frequently lately. In her rearview mirror, she could see George's headlights following the same route for several blocks before he turned toward his own neighborhood. At home, she found Jordan waiting up with the transparency of a teenager who'd been dying of curiosity. "How was the gala?" "Successful. We raised over $200,000 for the housing project." And what?" "Mom, you've been texting someone all week. You bought a new dress. You're humming jazz standards. Don't treat me like I'm oblivious." Deja settled onto the couch beside her child, suddenly grateful for Jordan's direct approach to emotional honesty. "The architect, George Edwards, asked me to dinner." "The business dinner you already had?" "A different kind of dinner." Jordan's face lit up with the kind of delight that suggested he'd been hoping for exactly this development. "Like a date?" "Like, getting to know each other better." "Mom, that's called a date." "I know what it's called." "And you said yes?" "I said yes." Jordan studied her mother's face with the intensity of someone who'd watched her navigate years of unhappiness and wanted to be sure this new development was cause for celebration. "Are you excited or terrified?" "Both." "Good. That means it matters." Later that night, as Deja prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. Jordan was right, she looked different. Not just because of the makeup or the elegant dress, but because something in her eyes had awakened. Something that had been dormant so long she'd forgotten it existed. She looked like a woman who was remembering what it felt like to be desired for who she was rather than what she could provide. A woman who was discovering that healing didn't just mean learning to live without pain, it meant opening herself to joy. Her phone buzzed with a text from George, "Thank you for a wonderful evening. I'm already looking forward to Friday." She stared at the message for a long moment, her heart beating faster than seemed reasonable. Then she typed back, "So am I." For the first time in years, she fell asleep thinking about possibility rather than just survival. Chapter 5. Friday arrived with the kind of nervous energy that made Deja change her outfit 3 times before settling on a navy dress that struck the right balance between elegant and approachable. She'd chosen a restaurant she'd never been to, neutral territory that held no memories of her marriage or associations with Julian's business dealings. George had suggested Canoe, an upscale restaurant along the Chattahoochee River known for its innovative southern cuisine and romantic atmosphere. As her car wound through the tree-lined drive toward the restaurant, Deja felt her pulse quicken with anticipation. He was waiting for her in the lobby, and the sight of him made her breath catch. Without the formal constraint of business attire, George looked more relaxed, more approachable. His charcoal slacks and white button-down shirt suggested he dressed with care but not anxiety, and when he smiled at her approach, she felt the same electric awareness that had sparked between them at the gala. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who meant every word. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." The hostess led them to a table on the terrace overlooking the river, where the soft sound of moving water created natural intimacy. As they settled into their seats, Deja felt some of her nervousness ease. This felt right, not forced or awkward, but like a natural progression of the connection they'd been building. "I have to confess something," George said after they'd ordered wine. "I've been looking forward to this all week." "That's not much of a confession." "I've been looking forward to it too." "No, I mean really looking forward to it. Like a teenager with his first crush." It's been disconcerting. His honesty was disarming, and she found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn by his willingness to be vulnerable. "Disconcerting how?" "I haven't felt this way about anyone in a very long time. The anticipation, the curiosity about what you're thinking, the way I find myself checking my phone hoping for a text from you." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "It's wonderful and terrifying. I know the feeling." "Do you?" "George, I've been divorced for less than a year. I swore I wouldn't get involved with anyone until I was completely healed, completely independent, completely sure of who I am without a man defining me." She took a sip of wine, gathering courage for her own honesty. "But I find myself making exceptions for you." Something shifted in his expression, relief, maybe, or recognition of a shared vulnerability. "What kind of exceptions?" "The kind where I care about your opinion of me. Where I look forward to your calls. Where I catch myself wondering what you're doing when we're not together." The waiter brought their appetizers, but neither of them seemed particularly interested in food. The conversation had taken on the intensity of two people discovering they were standing on the same emotional ground. "Can I ask you something personal?" George said. "You can ask." "I might not answer." "What ended your marriage? I mean, what was the final straw?" The question was one she'd been asked by well-meaning friends, by her therapist, by Jordan in their own searching way. But coming from George, it felt different. Not like curiosity about drama, but like someone trying to understand her journey. "Julian told me I was nothing without him," she said simply. And for about 30 seconds, I believed him. What happened after 30 seconds? I remembered who I was before I met him. I remembered that I'd built myself from nothing once before, and I could do it again. George nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. It takes courage to walk away from security, even when that security comes with a price. What about you? You mentioned being betrayed by a business partner. My former partner, we'd been friends since college, was skimming money from our accounts and falsifying project reports to cover his gambling debts. I discovered it during an audit and had to choose between protecting our friendship and protecting our clients. That must have been devastating. It was. But it taught me something important about trust. Real trust isn't blind faith. It's choosing to believe in someone whose actions consistently support their words. The insight struck her as particularly relevant to their developing relationship. With Julian, she'd trusted blindly, ignoring red flags and believing promises that weren't supported by actions. With George, she was learning to trust gradually, allowing his consistency to earn her confidence. "Is that what you're doing with me?" she asked. "Watching to see if my actions support my words? Aren't you doing the same with me?" "Yes." "Good. That's how it should be." As the evening progressed, their conversation ranged from serious to playful, touching on everything from their childhood dreams to their current fears. George told her about growing up in a family where his father's construction business taught him the value of building things that lasted. Deja shared stories about her mother's wisdom and the lessons she'd learned about resilience. "Your mother sounds like she was an extraordinary woman," George said as they shared dessert. "She was. She used to tell me that a woman's strength isn't measured by what she can endure, but by what she refuses to accept." "Smart woman. She would have liked you." "What makes you say that?" "Because you listen without trying to fix. You ask questions without judging the answers. You treat me like an equal partner rather than something to be managed or protected." George reached across the table and covered her hand with his, a gesture so natural it seemed to surprise them both. His skin was warm, his touch gentle but sure, and Deja felt that electric awareness she was beginning to associate with his presence. "Deja, I want you to know that I don't have any agenda here beyond getting to know you better. I'm not trying to rescue you or convince you of anything. I'm just interested in your thoughts, your opinions, your dreams, your fears. All of it." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. When had someone last expressed interest in her inner life rather than just her usefulness? "That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in years." "Then you've been spending time with the wrong people." They lingered over coffee long after the restaurant had begun to empty, neither willing to end an evening that felt like the beginning of something important. When George finally walked her to her car, Deja felt the same reluctance she'd experienced as a teenager saying goodnight after a perfect first date. "Thank you for tonight," she said, leaning against her car door. "I can't remember the last time I enjoyed an evening this much." "Neither can I." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Deja, I'd like to see you again. Not for business, not for the project. For this. I'd like that too. Would it be too presumptuous to ask for a second date now?" She laughed, a sound that felt lighter than air. "A little presumptuous. But I like presumptuous. In that case, are you free next Saturday? There's an art exhibition opening at the Woodruff Arts Center. Photography from around the world showcasing innovative architecture in developing countries. You really know how to appeal to a girl's interests. I'm hoping I'm learning." As he leaned in to kiss her cheek goodnight, Deja caught the scent of his cologne, something warm and woodsy that she knew would trigger memories of this moment for weeks to come. The brush of his lips against her skin was brief, respectful, but it left her wanting more. "Good night, Deja." "Good night, George." Driving home, she found herself smiling at nothing, humming that same jazz standard, feeling alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyra. "How was the date?" She texted back, "Perfect. Details. Tomorrow. I need to process." But the truth was, she didn't want to process or analyze or dissect the evening into manageable pieces. She wanted to hold on to the feeling of connection, the sense that she'd found someone who saw her clearly and liked what he saw. At home, Jordan was waiting with the transparency of someone who'd been listening for the sound of her car in the driveway. "How was dinner?" "Wonderful. Mom, you're glowing again." "I'm happy, baby. For the first time in a very long time, I'm genuinely happy." Jordan studied her face with the intensity of someone who'd watched their mother rebuild herself from broken pieces. "He makes you happy?" "He makes me feel like myself. The best version of myself." "That's even better." That night, as Deja prepared for bed, she caught herself moving differently, not the careful, controlled movements of someone protecting themselves from injury, but the fluid, confident movements of someone who felt safe in her own skin. In the mirror, she saw a woman who was remembering what it felt like to be desired for her mind, cherished for her heart, and appreciated for her strength. A woman who was discovering that love didn't have to diminish her, it could amplify everything that made her remarkable. Her phone buzzed with one final text from George. "Sweet dreams, Deja. Thank you for a perfect evening." She typed back, "Sweet dreams, George. Thank you for reminding me what perfect feels like." As she fell asleep, Deja felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the delicious anticipation of a love story that was just beginning, written by two people who understood that the best relationships were built on mutual respect, genuine interest, and the courage to be vulnerable with someone worthy of that trust. Chapter 6. 3 weeks into their courtship, for that's what it was, Deja realized, old-fashioned and deliberate and utterly romantic, George invited her to his architectural firm's open house. The invitation came with a request that surprised her. Would she consider bringing Jordan? "The firm is unveiling a new community center designed for underserved youth," George explained during one of their now daily phone calls. "Jordan mentioned an interest in sustainable design, and I thought they might enjoy seeing how we integrate environmental considerations with community needs." The thoughtfulness of including Jordan in their developing relationship spoke to something deeper than mere politeness. George understood that dating Deja meant understanding her life as a mother, and that Jordan's opinion would matter in ways that went beyond teenage approval. Saturday morning found Deja and Jordan driving toward George's firm in Buckhead, the autumn Atlanta skyline brilliant against a cloudless sky. Jordan had dressed with the kind of careful consideration that suggested he was taking this meeting seriously. "Are you nervous?" Deja asked as they pulled into the parking garage of Edwards Architecture. "A little. I mean, if this gets serious, he's going to be around a lot, right?" The matter-of-fact way Jordan discussed the possibility of George becoming a permanent presence in their lives made Deja's heart flutter with anxiety and anticipation in equal measure. "Would that bother you?" "Depends on whether he's good enough for you." The protective tone in Jordan's voice reminded Deja that her 16-year-old had watched Julian gradually diminish her confidence and joy. Jordan had developed strong opinions about what his mother deserved in a partner. Edwards Architecture occupied 2 floors of a gleaming building that managed to be both modern and warm. The lobby featured a wall of windows showcasing scale models of George's projects, affordable housing developments, community centers, sustainable office buildings that proved environmental responsibility could be beautiful. "Ms. McLean?" "I'm Elena Rodriguez, Mr. Edwards' assistant. He's waiting for you upstairs." The elevator opened onto an open-concept workspace where architects bent over drafting tables, computer screens displayed 3D renderings, and the air hummed with creative energy. George emerged from a conference room, and Deja felt the familiar flutter of awareness that had become her body's automatic response to his presence. "Deja, Jordan, welcome to chaos," he said with a smile that included them both. "We're preparing for 3 project presentations next week, so please excuse the productive madness." He led them through the workspace, introducing them to his colleagues with obvious pride. "This is Deja McLean, the financial strategist making our affordable housing project possible, and her son Jordan." The introductions felt significant, not just polite acknowledgement, but genuine integration into his professional world. George wasn't hiding their relationship or treating it as separate from his work life. "Jordan, would you like to see the community center designs? I think you might find the renewable energy systems particularly interesting." The next hour passed in a blur of blueprints, environmental impact studies, and George's patient explanations of how architecture could serve both aesthetic and social purposes. But what struck Deja most was watching the interaction between George and Jordan. He spoke to her 16-year-old with the same respect he showed adult colleagues, answering technical questions without condescension, asking for Jordan's opinions as if they genuinely mattered. When Jordan mentioned an interest in environmental engineering, George didn't offer empty encouragement, he suggested specific programs and mentorship opportunities. "Mr. Edwards," Jordan said as they examined plans for solar panel integration, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "What are your intentions with my mom?" The directness of the question might have flustered another man, but George's expression grew serious, respectful of both the question and the person asking it. "My intentions are to get to know her better, to support her goals and dreams, and to earn the right to be part of her life. And yours, if you're comfortable with that." "Are you going to hurt her?" "Not intentionally. But if I do hurt her, I hope you'll tell me so I can make it right." Jordan studied his face with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read adult sincerity. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. "Okay. But I'm watching you. I wouldn't expect anything less." The exchange was interrupted by a commotion from the reception area, raised voices, the sharp click of expensive shoes on marble flooring, the kind of disturbance that made everyone in the office look up from their work. "I'm sorry, sir, but you can't just..." Elena's voice carried the strained politeness of someone trying to maintain professional boundaries. "I'm her husband. I have every right to speak with her." Deja's blood turned to ice. Julian's voice, carrying the particular tone of aggrieved entitlement that had once made her shrink with anxiety. Now it just made her angry. She turned toward the reception area to find Julian striding through the office, his tailored suit and commanding presence creating exactly the kind of scene he excelled at. Behind him trailed Andre Preston, Julian's financial advisor and enabler, looking uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge his meal ticket. Julian. Deja's voice carried the careful neutrality she'd perfected during their divorce proceedings. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same question. Taking Jordan to visit your new boyfriend during my visitation time? The accusation was typical Julian. Twisting facts to create grievance, making private matters public to maximize her discomfort. Deja felt George step closer to her, not protectively but supportively, his presence steady and reassuring. Today isn't your visitation day, Jordan said with the factual directness of someone who'd memorized the custody schedule. That's next weekend. Julian's expression flickered with irritation at being corrected by his own child. Jordan, why don't you wait in the car while the adults talk? No. Jordan's voice carried the steel that Deja recognized as her own. I'm staying with Mom. Jordan. You heard him, Deja said quietly. He's staying with me. Julian's attention shifted to George, and Deja could practically see him cataloging details, the expensive office space, the tailored clothing, the quiet confidence that suggested success and stability. So you're the architect, Julian said, his tone carrying the particular dismissiveness he reserved for men he considered competition. Taking advantage of a vulnerable woman going through a difficult transition. Julian, stop. Deja's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You don't get to do this anymore. You don't get to show up uninvited, create scenes, or speak for me. I'm looking out for your best interests, Deja. And Jordan's. This man is using you to get financing for his projects. The accusation was so far from the truth it was almost laughable, but Deja recognized the strategy: plant seeds of doubt, make her question her judgment, isolate her from sources of support and happiness. Mr. McLean. George's voice was calm, professional, but carrying an undertone of steel that suggested he'd dealt with bullies before. I'm going to ask you to leave my office. If you have concerns about the custody arrangement, you can address them through appropriate legal channels. I don't take orders from you. You do in my building. The quiet authority in George's response seemed to surprise Julian, who was used to intimidating through volume and aggression. Andre Preston stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Julian's arm. Julian, maybe we should. Don't tell me what to do, Andre. I'm not. I'm suggesting that this isn't the time or place for this conversation. Deja watched the interaction with the detached fascination of someone observing a train wreck. Julian had always been prone to dramatic gestures when he felt his control slipping, but this level of public scene-making suggested desperation. Jordan, Julian tried again, his voice taking on the false warmth he used when he wanted to manipulate through affection rather than intimidation. Come on, son. Let's go get some lunch and talk about this. The rejection from his own child seemed to hit Julian harder than anything else. For a moment, his composure cracked, and Deja saw something that might have been genuine pain in his expression. Fine, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. But don't come crying to me when this whole thing falls apart. Don't say I didn't warn you when he gets what he wants and moves on to his next project. With that parting shot, Julian turned and stalked toward the elevator, Andre Preston trailing behind him with the expression of someone who wished he were anywhere else. The office fell silent except for the soft hum of computers and air conditioning. Deja realized she was trembling, not with fear, but with adrenaline and fury at Julian's attempt to humiliate her in front of George's colleagues. I'm sorry, she said to George, her voice shaking with emotion she was trying to control. I'm so sorry he did that here. Don't apologize for his behavior, George said gently. You have nothing to be sorry for. Mom, are you okay? Jordan's voice carried the worried tone of someone who'd seen their mother handle Julian's tantrums before but never in such a public setting. I'm fine, baby. Just angry. He can't keep doing this, Jordan said with the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd watched their mother suffer for too long. He can't keep showing up and trying to make you feel bad for being happy. George knelt beside Jordan's chair, bringing himself to his eye level. Your mom is one of the strongest people I've ever met. What just happened doesn't change that. It just shows how threatened some people feel when strong women refuse to be controlled. The simple statement seemed to calm something in Jordan's expression, and Deja felt a rush of gratitude for George's instinctive understanding of what her child needed to hear. Would you like to continue the tour? George asked, standing and offering his hand to help Deja from her chair. Or would you prefer to leave? Continue, Deja said without hesitation. I won't let Julian's tantrum ruin our afternoon. But as they resumed their tour of the office, Deja found herself thinking about Julian's accusations. Was she being naive to trust George so completely? Was she allowing her loneliness and desire for connection to cloud her judgment? Sometimes the people who claim to love us the most are the ones who try to control us the most. If you've experienced this kind of emotional manipulation, know that you're not alone. Share how you found your strength in the comments. The thoughts plagued her through the rest of the afternoon, even as George continued to be nothing but thoughtful and respectful. When he suggested they stop for lunch at a small cafe near his office, she found herself studying his interactions with the staff, his conversation with Jordan, looking for signs that Julian might be right about his motivations. You're quiet, George observed as they waited for their order. Just processing. Julian's visit? Julian's accusations. George was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Do you want to talk about what he said? Do you deny it? Which part? That you're using me to get financing for your projects. The question hung between them like a challenge, and Deja realized she was holding her breath, waiting for his answer. Deja, I secured funding for the housing project before I ever met you. Your financial strategies made it more profitable and more sustainable, but the project would have proceeded without your involvement. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. I'm not dating you for business reasons. I'm dating you because I find you remarkable, and I want to know everything about what makes you remarkable. The simplicity and directness of his answer cut through her doubts like sunlight through clouds. This was what Julian had never understood. That truth spoken plainly was more powerful than any manipulation. I needed to ask. I know. And I'm glad you did. Trust should be earned, not assumed. On the drive home, Jordan was unusually quiet, staring out the window at the passing Atlanta landscape. What are you thinking about? Deja asked. Dad's never going to stop, is he? Trying to control you, I mean. The question carried the weight of someone who was beginning to understand adult complexities, and Deja chose to answer with honesty rather than false reassurance. He might not. But what matters is that I won't let him succeed. What if he tries to mess up your relationship with George? Then George and I will deal with it together. That's what partners do, they face challenges as a team. Is that what you and George are? Partners? Deja considered the question as they pulled into their apartment complex. Were they partners? It was early days still, but the foundation felt solid in ways her relationship with Julian never had. We're becoming partners, she said finally. Learning how to support each other, how to communicate honestly, how to build something together. That evening, after Jordan had gone to his room to work on homework, Deja sat in her small home office staring at her phone. She wanted to call George, to apologize again for Julian's behavior, to reassure him that she didn't believe Julian's accusations. But underneath the desire for connection was a need for space to process what had happened. Her phone rang before she could decide what to do. George's name appeared on the screen, and she answered on the second ring. How are you feeling? He asked without preamble. Embarrassed. Angry. Grateful that Jordan handled it so well. You have nothing to be embarrassed about. Julian's behavior reflects on him, not on you. I keep thinking about what he said. About me being vulnerable, about you taking advantage. Deja, stop. Are you vulnerable? Yes, in the way that anyone who's rebuilding their life after a major change is vulnerable. But vulnerability isn't weakness. It's courage. It's the willingness to risk being hurt in order to find genuine connection. His words settled something in her chest that had been tight with anxiety since Julian's appearance. I don't want his poison to contaminate what we're building, she said. It won't. Not unless we let it. How do we not let it? By continuing to be honest with each other. By trusting the evidence of our own experience rather than his version of our story. By remembering that people who try to destroy others' happiness usually do so because they're incapable of creating their own. The wisdom in his response reminded her why she'd been drawn to him in the first place. George possessed the kind of emotional intelligence that allowed him to see through manipulation to truth. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For not running when things got complicated. Deja, complicated doesn't scare me. Dishonesty scares me. Cruelty scares me. Drama for the sake of drama scares me. But two people working through challenges together? That's not complicated. That's real life. After they hung up, Deja sat in the quiet of her apartment feeling something shift inside her chest. Julian's surprise appearance had been designed to shake her confidence, to make her question her judgment and George's motives. Instead, it had shown her the difference between a man who used chaos to control and a man who offered stability in the face of chaos. For the first time since the divorce, she felt truly free, not just from Julian's presence, but from his power to influence her sense of reality. She was building something new, something honest, something that belonged entirely to her. And she was building it with someone who saw her clearly and chose to stay. Chapter 7. 2 months into their relationship, George invited Deja to his home workshop, a converted garage space where he built custom furniture as a hobby. The invitation came with a specific purpose. He wanted to show her the jewelry box he was crafting for Jordan's 16th birthday. You're making Jordan a memory box? Deja asked during their usual goodnight phone call. A memory box, actually. Something for storing important things, letters, photographs, small treasures. I thought about what a 16-year-old might want to preserve from this chapter of his life. The thoughtfulness of the gesture made Deja's throat tighten with emotion. George had been quietly observing her child for months, learning Jordan's interests and personality, and now he was creating something specifically designed for who Jordan was becoming. That's incredibly sweet of you. I enjoy working with my hands. And I wanted to make something that would last, something that would remind Jordan of this time when he was brave enough to support his mother's happiness. Saturday evening found Deja driving to George's house in Vinings, a neighborhood of established homes with mature trees and the kind of quiet elegance that suggested success earned rather than inherited. His house was a restored craftsman bungalow that managed to be both impressive and welcoming, with wide porches and windows that suggested the interior would be filled with natural light. George met her at the front door, dressed in jeans and a worn flannel shirt that somehow made him more attractive than any expensive suit. Seeing him in casual clothes, in his own space, felt like crossing another threshold in their relationship. Welcome to my sanctuary, he said, leading her through a living room filled with comfortable furniture and architectural drawings, books stacked on every surface. Fair warning. The workshop is where I go to think, so it might reveal more about my mental state than you're prepared for. The workshop was accessed through the kitchen, down a few steps into what had once been a 2-car garage. George had transformed it into a craftsman's dream, workbenches lined with hand tools, lumber sorted by type and size, the warm scent of wood shavings and finishing oil filling the air. This is incredible, Deja said, running her fingers along the smooth surface of a hand-planed board. You built all of this? Over about 5 years. Whenever I need to solve a design problem or work through something complicated, I come out here and work with my hands. There's something about creating something tangible that clears my mind. The space felt intensely personal, like being invited into someone's private thoughts. Deja could see the evidence of hours spent in careful craftsmanship. Furniture in various stages of completion, hand tools arranged with the precision of someone who took pride in his craft. "Here's Jordan's box," George said, leading her to a workbench where an elegant wooden chest sat partially finished. The piece was beautiful, crafted from what looked like cherry wood, with subtle curves and clean lines that suggested both strength and grace. The lid was inlaid with a pattern that reminded Deja of the sustainable architecture George designed, geometric but organic. "George, this is gorgeous. Jordan is going to love it." "I hope so. I wanted to make something that would grow with him, something he'd still treasure as an adult." As he showed her the details of the construction, the hand-cut dovetail joints, the soft felt lining, the small compartments designed for different types of treasures, Deja found herself watching his hands. They moved with the same precision she'd noticed when he drew architectural plans, but there was something different here, something more intimate about watching him create beauty with his own hands. "What's this?" She'd noticed a collection of papers tucked under the edge of his workbench, sketches that looked familiar. George hesitated, a flush of color rising in his cheeks. "Those are just studies. For work." But as he reached to move them away, Deja caught sight of lines that looked remarkably like her own profile, her hands, the way she held her head when she was listening intently. "George, are those? I draw when I'm thinking. It helps me process ideas, emotions, whatever I'm working through." He pulled out the sketches with obvious reluctance. "These are from our early meetings. I hope you don't think it's inappropriate." The drawings were beautiful, not romantic in an obvious way, but architectural in their precision and attention to detail. They showed her from various angles, captured moments when she'd been unaware of his observation. Her hands as she gestured while explaining a financial concept. Her profile as she'd studied the housing development plans. Her smile when she'd talked about Jordan's achievements. "You've been drawing me since we met?" "Since the first coffee meeting. I couldn't stop thinking about the way you moved, the way you listened, the way you seemed to carry yourself with this incredible combination of strength and grace." The sketches revealed something that took her breath away. In George's eyes, she wasn't just attractive, she was fascinating. These weren't drawings of a woman he wanted to possess, but studies of someone he found endlessly interesting. "I look." She studied one of the sketches, seeing herself through his eyes. "I look confident. Strong. Because you are. I don't always feel that way. The best strength is the kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that simply exists, quietly and completely." Standing in his workshop, surrounded by the tools of his craft and the evidence of his careful attention to her, Deja felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't just attraction or affection, this was recognition. George saw her the way she'd always hoped to be seen, the way she'd never quite believed she deserved to be seen. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me clearly." The workshop's warm lighting cast golden shadows across his face, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with possibility. They'd been careful with each other, respectful of boundaries, building trust slowly and deliberately. But standing here, in this intimate space surrounded by evidence of his patient attention to her, Deja felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "Deja," George said, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you." "What?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge she could choose to cross or leave unbuilt. For months, she'd felt the foundation of something deeper building between them, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "George. I know it's early. I know you're still healing from your divorce. I know we agreed to take things slowly." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "But I can't pretend anymore that this is just casual dating for me. What I feel for you, it's deeper than anything I've experienced." The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability in his admission, broke through the last of her defenses. Here was a man willing to risk rejection to speak his truth, willing to be vulnerable with someone who might not be ready to return his feelings. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I've been fighting it, telling myself it's too soon, that I should be more careful. But standing here, seeing how you see me, I can't fight it anymore." George's smile transformed his entire face, and suddenly he was moving toward her, his hands framing her face with the gentleness of someone holding something precious. "May I kiss you?" The question, asked with such formal courtesy, made her laugh even as her heart raced. Yes. The kiss was everything their careful courtship had been building toward, tender but passionate, patient but hungry, the physical expression of emotions they'd been nurturing for months. Deja felt herself melting into his arms, her body recognizing what her heart had already known: this was home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, George rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks." "Only weeks?" "I've been wanting it since the night at the museum. The fundraising gala. When you said you wanted something to remind you of the evening. I wanted to be that something." George's laugh was soft, intimate, meant only for her. "You have been. Every day since then, you've been what I think about when I wake up and what I dream about when I fall asleep." The workshop around them faded into background as they held each other, months of careful emotional building culminating in this moment of mutual recognition. But even as Deja surrendered to the feelings she'd been fighting, a part of her mind was already cataloging the complications this would bring. Julian's attempts to undermine her confidence. The custody arrangement that gave him leverage to create chaos in her life. The business relationships that could be affected if their romance went wrong. The fact that she was still learning who she was as an independent woman. "What are you thinking about?" George asked, his architect's intuition reading the shift in her mood. "All the ways this could get complicated." "Are you having second thoughts?" "No. But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of trusting my judgment. Of believing this is real when I was so wrong about Julian. Of letting myself hope for something beautiful and having it destroyed by someone who can't stand to see me happy." George's hands moved to her shoulders, steadying her in the way that was becoming familiar and necessary. "Deja, what you had with Julian wasn't love. It was control disguised as care. What we're building, this is different. This is partnership." "How can you be sure?" "Because I want you to be stronger, not weaker. I want you to succeed, not depend on me. I want to support your dreams, not replace them with mine." The simple distinction cut through her fears like sunlight through storm clouds. Julian had loved the idea of her, successful enough to be an asset, dependent enough to be controllable. George loved her reality. Complex, independent, sometimes difficult, entirely herself. "I want this," she said, the admission feeling like stepping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. "I want us. Even knowing it won't be easy. Especially knowing that easy never taught me anything worth learning." This time when George kissed her, it carried the weight of commitment, of two people choosing each other despite the complications, because of the possibilities. Later, as they sat together on the small couch in his workshop, Deja's head resting on George's shoulder, she felt something she hadn't experienced since before her marriage: perfect contentment. Not the desperate happiness of someone grateful for scraps of affection, but the deep satisfaction of someone who knew herself to be truly valued. "George? Thank you for waiting for me to be ready. Thank you for being worth waiting for." Outside, autumn rain had begun to fall, drumming softly against the workshop windows. Inside, surrounded by the tools of creation and the evidence of careful craftsmanship, Deja felt like she was exactly where she belonged. For the first time in her adult life, she was in love with someone who loved her back without conditions, without requirements for her to be smaller or quieter or less ambitious. Someone who saw her strength as an asset rather than a threat. Someone who was building something beautiful, not just furniture, but a relationship based on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and the radical notion that love should make both people better versions of themselves. Chapter 8. 1 month after that transformative evening in George's workshop, Deja's carefully rebuilt world came under attack from an unexpected direction. She was reviewing quarterly reports in her office when her assistant knocked with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Mrs. McLean? There's a process server here. And your ex-husband is on line 1, saying it's urgent regarding Jordan." Deja's blood turned to ice. Julian calling about Jordan during school hours could only mean one thing: some kind of crisis or emergency. But a process server suggested legal action, which made no sense unless. "Put Julian through first," she said, her voice steady despite the way her heart was racing. "Deja, thank God. Have you seen the papers yet?" "What papers?" "Julian, what's going on? Is Jordan okay?" "Jordan's fine. But I've filed for a modification of our custody agreement." "Full custody, Deja. I can't stand by and watch you destroy my son's life and stability with your poor judgment." The words hit her like physical blows. "What are you talking about?" "Your relationship with Edwards. Exposing Jordan to unstable romantic relationships, prioritizing your personal life over our child's needs, making decisions based on emotion rather than Jordan's best interests." Deja closed her eyes, feeling the familiar sensation of Julian's manipulation wrapping around her like chains. He'd waited, watched, planned this attack for maximum impact. "Julian, my relationship with George has been nothing but positive for Jordan. He likes him, a 16-year-old's opinion isn't relevant here. What's relevant is that you're so desperate for male attention that you're willing to risk our child's emotional security. That's not. The court date is set for 3 weeks from Friday. I suggest you get a good lawyer, because I'm not backing down on this. Jordan deserves better than a mother who puts her own needs first." The line went dead, leaving Deja staring at her phone in stunned silence. Through her office windows, she could see Atlanta's skyline glittering in the afternoon sun, the same view that had inspired her when she'd first rented this space. Now it felt like she was looking at it from behind prison bars. The process server delivered papers that made Julian's threats real. A formal petition for modification of custody, citing material changes in circumstances and concerns about the minor child's emotional stability in light of the respondent's romantic entanglements. The legal language was cold, clinical, designed to make her relationship with George sound sordid and irresponsible. Reading it, Deja felt her carefully rebuilt confidence beginning to crack. Her first call was to Tyra, who answered on the first ring as if she'd been expecting this development. "How bad is it?" Tyra asked without preamble. "He's asking for full custody. Claims I'm putting Jordan at risk by dating George. Bastard. He waited until you were happy, didn't he? Waited until he could cause maximum damage. Can he win?" Tyra was quiet for a moment, and the silence stretched long enough to terrify Deja. "With the right judge and the right narrative? Possibly. Family court can be unpredictable, especially when one party presents as the stable, concerned father and paints the other as emotionally unstable. But I'm not emotionally unstable. My relationship with George is healthy, stable, I know that. You know that. But Julian's going to argue that you rushed into a relationship before you were fully healed from your divorce, that you're exposing Jordan to uncertainty, that your judgment is compromised by loneliness and desperation." Each word hit like a hammer blow because Deja could hear exactly how Julian would present those arguments. He'd always been skilled at taking her strengths and reframing them as weaknesses, her independence as selfishness, her happiness as irresponsibility. "What do I do? Fight. Document everything. Show the court who you really are and what kind of mother you've been. And Deja? Don't let him isolate you. Don't push George away just because Julian's using your relationship as ammunition. But even as Tyra spoke, Deja felt the familiar impulse to retreat, to protect herself by eliminating anything Julian could use against her. Maybe if she ended things with George, focused solely on being Jordan's mother, Julian would back down. That evening, she picked Jordan up from school with a heaviness in her chest that her child noticed immediately. "Mom, you look like someone died. What's wrong?" Deja waited until they were home, until Jordan was settled at the kitchen table with homework and an after-school snack, before delivering the news that would change everything. "Your father has filed for a change in our custody arrangement. He wants full custody of you." Jordan's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger, before settling on something that looked like weary resignation. Because of George. It wasn't a question. At 16, Jordan understood his father's patterns well enough to recognize manipulation disguised as concern. That's what he claims. He says, "I'm not making good decisions, that my relationship with George is somehow harmful to you." That's ridiculous. George is the first person you've dated who actually treats you like you matter. The simple statement carried such clarity that it cut through Deja's growing panic like sunlight through fog. Her 16-year-old could see what Julian was doing even if a family court judge might not. But what if the court agrees with him? What if they think, "Mom, stop"? Jordan's voice carried an authority that surprised them both. "You're doing that thing again. That thing where you let Dad's voice in your head convince you that you don't deserve good things." The observation was so accurate it made Deja's chest tighten with emotion. Even in the face of Julian's legal attack, Jordan could see the real battle being fought, not just for custody, but for Deja's right to happiness. "I'm scared, baby. I can't lose you." "You won't. Because I'm not going to let that happen." "Jordan, you're 16. You don't get to decide." "Actually, I do. In Georgia, kids my age can express a preference about custody. And I know exactly what my preference is." That night, after Jordan had gone to bed, Deja sat in her home office staring at the legal papers, feeling the weight of Julian's threats pressing down on her like physical force. Her phone buzzed with a text from George: "Thinking of you. How was your day?" She stared at the message for a long time, her finger hovering over the keyboard. How could she explain that her day had been spent watching her carefully rebuilt life come under attack? How could she tell him that their relationship, the thing that had brought her more joy than she'd experienced in years, was now being used as a weapon against her? Instead of texting back, she called him. "Deja? You sound upset. What's wrong?" "Julian filed for full custody of Jordan. He's claiming that my relationship with you makes me an unfit mother." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Deja began to wonder if the call had dropped. When George finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "What can I do to help?" The question was so different from what she'd expected that it took her a moment to process it. Not, "Maybe we should take a break until this is resolved." Not, "I don't want to get in the middle of your custody battle." Just an immediate offer of support. "I don't know. Tyra says I should document everything, show the court what kind of mother I really am." "But George, what if they believe him? What if they think I'm being selfish and irresponsible?" "Are you being selfish and irresponsible?" "No. I don't think so. But Julian's always been good at making me question my own judgment." "Then we don't let him win this round. We fight back with truth." "We? If you want my support, you have it. Completely. I'm not going anywhere, Deja." The simple statement unlocked something in her chest that had been tight with fear since Julian's call. She wasn't facing this alone. She had someone who was willing to stand with her, not run from the complications. "This is going to get ugly. Julian will try to destroy anything good in my life just to prove he can." Let him try. What we have isn't built on his permission or approval. After they hung up, Deja sat in the darkness of her living room, feeling something shift in her approach to Julian's attack. For years, she'd responded to his manipulation by trying to appease him, to minimize the things that threatened his control. This time, she was going to fight. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of legal preparation, depositions, and character witnesses. Tyra worked tirelessly to build a case that showed Deja's life since the divorce, her successful business, her stable home environment, her positive relationship with Jordan. We need to show the court that you're not some desperate divorcee rushing into an inappropriate relationship, Tyra explained during one of their strategy sessions. We need to show them who you really are, a successful businesswoman, a devoted mother, and a woman who's built a healthy, stable relationship with a respectable man. George insisted on providing a character reference, despite Deja's concerns about involving him directly in the legal proceedings. Julian's making our relationship the issue, he pointed out during dinner at his house. The court should hear from me about what that relationship actually looks like. What if it backfires? What if they see your involvement as proof that I'm prioritizing romance over motherhood? Then they'll be wrong. And will appeal. The confidence in his voice reminded her why she'd fallen in love with him. George didn't just offer pretty words of support. He offered the kind of unwavering partnership she'd never experienced before. Jordan, meanwhile, had become a fierce advocate for his mother, documenting every positive interaction with George, every way their life had improved since the divorce. I'm making a presentation for the judge, Jordan announced one evening. With pictures and everything, showing how much happier you are now, how much better our family works. Jordan, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Dad's trying to use me as a weapon against you, and I won't let that happen. You deserve to be happy, Mom. And George makes you happy. The night before the custody hearing, Deja couldn't sleep. She paced her apartment, reviewing Tyra's advice, second-guessing every decision that had brought her to this point. At 2 a.m, her phone buzzed with a text from George, "Can't sleep either. Want company?" 20 minutes later, he was sitting on her couch, holding her while she cried out her fears and frustrations. "What if I lose?" she whispered against his chest. "You won't. How can you be so sure?" "Because you're an incredible mother. Because Jordan adores you. Because any judge who spends 5 minutes with you will see exactly what I see, a woman who's fought hard to build a better life for herself and her child. What if they don't see that? What if they just see a woman who chose her own happiness over her child's stability?" George pulled back far enough to look into her eyes. "Then they'll be wrong. But Deja, even if the worst happens, even if Julian wins, we'll figure it out. Together. You might not want to be with someone who doesn't have custody of their child. I want to be with you. Whatever that looks like." The simple declaration broke through the last of her defenses. Here was a man willing to stand by her even if she lost the thing that mattered most to her. Someone who saw her worth independent of her circumstances. The courthouse the next morning was everything Deja had feared: sterile, intimidating, designed to make people feel small and powerless. Julian arrived looking like the successful businessman he was, accompanied by Andre Preston and a lawyer who specialized in high-conflict custody cases. "He's trying to intimidate you," Tyra murmured as they took their seats. "Don't let him succeed." The hearing began with Julian's lawyer painting a picture of Deja as a woman whose judgment had been compromised by her desperate need for male attention. He presented emails between Deja and George, photographs from social media, testimony from Andre Preston about Julian's concerns for Jordan's emotional well-being. "My client isn't trying to punish his ex-wife for moving on," Julian's lawyer argued. "He's simply concerned that she's making decisions based on her own emotional needs rather than what's best for their child." Listening to her relationship with George described as evidence of poor judgment made Deja feel physically sick. But when it was Tyra's turn to present their case, she felt the tide beginning to turn. "Your Honor, what we have here is a successful businesswoman who has rebuilt her life after divorce with grace and strength. Ms. McLean hasn't rushed into anything, she's been thoughtful, deliberate, and always put Jordan's needs first." Tyra presented evidence of Deja's financial stability, her involvement in Jordan's school and activities, character references from teachers and community leaders. Then she called Jordan to testify. Watching her 16-year-old take the witness stand was one of the hardest things Deja had ever experienced. But Jordan spoke with a clarity and maturity that impressed everyone in the courtroom. "My mom is the strongest person I know," Jordan said when asked about their home environment. After the divorce, she could have been bitter or angry, but instead she focused on building something better for us. "George doesn't take anything away from our relationship, he adds to it." "How so?" "He treats my mom with respect. He listens to her ideas. He encourages her to pursue her dreams. He's teaching me about architecture and sustainable design. He makes my mom happy in a way I haven't seen since I was little." When Julian's lawyer tried to suggest that Jordan was too young to understand the complexities of adult relationships, Jordan's response was devastating in its simplicity. "I'm old enough to know the difference between love and control. My mom's relationship with George is based on love. My parents' marriage was based on control." Finally, George took the stand. Deja held her breath as Julian's lawyer tried to paint him as a predator taking advantage of a vulnerable divorced woman. "Mr. Edwards, isn't it true that you began pursuing Ms. McLean professionally before transitioning to a personal relationship?" "No. I met Ms. McLean in a professional context, but our personal relationship developed organically over time. I never pursued her professionally with romantic intentions." "You don't find it convenient that your romantic partner also provides financial services for your business projects?" "Ms. McLean provides financial services for one project, which was fully funded before we began dating. Her professional expertise is completely separate from my personal feelings for her." "What exactly are your intentions regarding Ms. McLean and her son?" George looked directly at Deja before answering. "I intend to love and support them both. To be a positive presence in their lives. To help create a stable, happy home where Jordan can thrive and where Deja can continue to grow personally and professionally." The judge's decision came after a brief recess that felt like hours. When the court reconvened, Deja felt like she might collapse from the tension. Having reviewed all the evidence and testimony, the judge began, "I find that Mr. McLean has failed to demonstrate that a material change in circumstances warrants modification of the existing custody arrangement." Deja's knees nearly buckled with relief. Ms. McLean has shown herself to be a devoted mother who has successfully rebuilt her life after divorce. Her relationship with Mr. Edwards appears to be stable, healthy, and beneficial to the minor child. The court sees no evidence that this relationship compromises her ability to parent effectively. The judge's final words were directed at Julian. "Mr. McLean, while your concern for your child is noted, the court reminds you that your ex-wife's personal life is not subject to your approval unless it directly harms your child. The evidence suggests the opposite, that Ms. McLean's happiness and stability benefit your child considerably." Walking out of the courthouse, Deja felt like she could finally breathe again. Julian brushed past them without a word, his face tight with fury at the defeat. Andre Preston looked relieved to escape the drama he'd helped create. "It's over," Tyra said, embracing her friend. "You won." "We won," Deja corrected, looking at George and Jordan standing together, both beaming with relief and pride. That evening, at George's house, they celebrated with Jordan's favorite takeout and the memory box George had finished the night before. Watching Jordan open the gift, his face lighting up at the beautiful craftsmanship and thoughtful design, Deja felt something settle into place in her chest. "Thank you," Jordan said to George, but he was looking at his mother. "For making Mom happy. For sticking around when things got complicated. For being exactly what our family needed." Later, After Jordan had gone home to finish homework, Deja and George sat together on his couch, the adrenaline of the day's victory slowly fading into something deeper. "I can't believe it's over," she said, curled against his side. "Did you doubt we'd win?" "Yes. No. Maybe." She looked up at him, studying the face that had become so dear to her. "I doubted whether I deserved to win. Whether I had the right to choose my own happiness. And now? Now I know that I don't need anyone's permission to build the life I want. Not Julian's, not the court's, not anyone's." George's smile was soft, proud, infinitely tender. "That might be the most beautiful thing you've ever said." "I love you," she said, the words carrying the weight of everything they'd been through together. "I love you without reservations, without fear, without apology. I love you too. Both of you. This family we're building together." Outside, Atlanta sparkled in the darkness, a city full of possibilities and new beginnings. Inside, surrounded by the evidence of George's patient craftsmanship and careful love, Deja felt like she was exactly where she belonged. She'd fought for her right to happiness and won. She'd chosen love over fear, partnership over control, truth over manipulation. And in doing so, she'd discovered something Julian had tried to steal from her, the knowledge that she was worthy of love that honored rather than diminished her. The custody battle was over, but the real victory was deeper than any legal decision. She'd learned to trust her own judgment, to fight for what mattered, and to build something beautiful with someone who saw her clearly and chose to stay. For the first time in her life, she was exactly who she wanted to be, a successful businesswoman, a devoted mother, and a woman deeply in love with someone who loved her back without conditions or requirements. She was free. Chapter 9. 3 months after the custody hearing, on a quiet Sunday evening in early spring, Deja found herself in George's kitchen helping him prepare dinner. The domesticity of the moment, chopping vegetables while he seasoned chicken, moving around each other with the practiced ease of people who'd learned to share space, filled her with contentment. Jordan was spending the weekend with Julian, one of their regularly scheduled visits that had become easier for everyone as the drama of the custody battle faded into memory. Julian had been notably subdued since his legal defeat, finally seeming to understand that Deja's happiness wasn't subject to his approval. "Penny for your thoughts," George said, looking up from the stove where he was sautéing garlic and herbs. "Just thinking about how normal this feels. How right. Normal is underrated. Says the man who designs revolutionary architecture. Revolutionary architecture still needs solid foundations." The metaphor wasn't lost on her. Everything they'd built together had been constructed on the foundation of mutual respect, honest communication, and the patience to let trust develop naturally. No dramatic gestures or whirlwind romance, just two people choosing each other consistently, day after day. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jordan, "Dad's actually being nice tonight. Asking about school, about my interests. It's weird but good weird. How's your evening with George?" She texted back, "Perfectly ordinary and perfectly wonderful. That's the best kind of wonderful. Love you, Mom. Love you too, baby." George noticed her smile as she set the phone aside. "Good news from Jordan? He's having a good visit with Julian. He's actually engaging like a parent instead of treating Jordan like a chess piece in our relationship. Maybe winning wasn't the best thing for Julian, but losing was." The observation was typically George, insightful without being harsh, recognizing that even Julian's defeat might ultimately benefit everyone involved, including Julian himself. After dinner, they moved to his living room, where a fire crackled softly in the fireplace and jazz played from speakers hidden throughout the room. Deja curled up beside George on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder, feeling the kind of peace she'd never thought possible. "Deja," George said, his voice carrying a tone that made her look up at him. "There's something I want to talk to you about." The sudden seriousness in his expression made her heart skip. "What is it?" I've been thinking about our future. About what we're building together. And I want to build something permanent with you. Something that honors what we've created and acknowledges that this isn't just dating anymore, it's partnership. Her breath caught as he shifted on the couch, reaching into his pocket to pull out a small velvet box. George. I know we haven't talked about marriage specifically. I know you might need more time after everything you've been through. But I wanted you to know how serious I am about us, about the life we're creating together. He opened the box to reveal a ring that took her breath away, not ostentatious or flashy, but elegant and unique, with a central stone surrounded by smaller diamonds in a setting that looked like it had been designed specifically for her. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, he continued, his voice gentle but steady. I'm asking if you'll consider spending your life with me. If you'll consider making this official. Not because we need legal papers to validate what we have, but because I want the world to know that you've chosen me and I've chosen you. Deja stared at the ring, her mind racing. Marriage. The institution that had once been a source of such pain and disappointment. But looking at George's face, seeing the love and hope and patience in his eyes, she realized that marriage itself hadn't been the problem, it had been marrying the wrong person for the wrong reasons. You said you're not asking for an answer tonight, she said slowly. But what if I want to give you one? His expression shifted from hope to something that looked like carefully controlled anticipation. What would that answer be? Yes. The word hung between them for a moment before George's face broke into a smile that transformed his entire presence. Yes? Yes. I want to spend my life with you. I want to build something permanent and beautiful together. I want to be your wife. The kiss that followed was everything their relationship had been, passionate but tender, urgent but patient, expressing everything that words couldn't capture. When they finally broke apart, George slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. It fits perfectly, she said, studying the way the stones caught the firelight. I may have asked Jordan for your ring size. You involved Jordan in this? I wanted to make sure they were comfortable with the idea of us getting married. Their opinion matters to me almost as much as yours does. The thoughtfulness of including Jordan in the proposal planning made Deja's throat tighten with emotion. George hadn't just asked her to marry him, he'd asked to become part of their family, understanding that loving her meant loving her child too. What did Jordan say? He said it was about time. That night, as they lay together in George's bed, Deja studied the ring on her finger in the moonlight streaming through the windows. The physical weight of it was barely noticeable, but the emotional weight was profound, a symbol of commitment freely chosen, trust earned and given, love that had grown from friendship into something unshakable. Are you happy? George asked, his voice soft in the darkness. I'm more than happy. I'm complete. For the first time in my adult life, I feel like all the pieces of who I am fit together perfectly. Even the broken pieces. Especially the broken pieces. They taught me how to recognize something worth keeping. George's arms tightened around her, and she felt the solid reality of his presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way his body curved protectively around hers. I want to love you the way you deserve to be loved, he whispered against her hair. With patience and respect and celebration of everything that makes you remarkable. You already do. I want to do it for the rest of our lives. The promise in his voice made her turn in his arms so she could see his face in the dim light. What she saw there, love without possession, desire without demands, commitment without conditions, made her believe in forever in a way she never had before. George? Make love to me. The request was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they'd built together. This wasn't just physical desire, it was emotional surrender, the complete trust of someone who'd learned the difference between being taken and being cherished. What followed was a symphony of gentle hands and whispered endearments, of two people who'd waited long enough to know exactly what they were choosing. George loved her with the same patience and attention to detail he brought to his architecture, as if he were creating something designed to last forever. When she arched beneath his touch, her breath catching as waves of pleasure built and crested, Deja felt walls she'd built around her heart dissolving completely. This was what it meant to be loved without reservation, to give yourself completely to someone who would hold that gift with reverence. Later, as they lay entwined in the aftermath of their lovemaking, Deja felt tears sliding down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen, known, and loved exactly as she was. "Are you crying?" George asked, concern in his voice. "Happy tears. I didn't know it was possible to feel this safe with someone." "Safe? Safe to be myself completely. Safe to want things. Safe to believe I deserve them." George's hand found hers in the darkness, his thumb tracing over the engagement ring that felt like a promise made real. "You deserve everything beautiful, Deja. Every moment of joy, every dream fulfilled, every day of feeling loved and valued and seen. So do you. Then we'll give those things to each other." As sleep began to claim them both, Deja felt something settle into place in her chest, not just happiness, but the deep satisfaction of knowing she'd chosen correctly. She'd waited to heal before opening her heart again. She'd fought for her right to happiness. She'd built something authentic and lasting with someone who understood that love was meant to elevate, not diminish. Tomorrow, she would call Jordan and Tyra and share the news of their engagement. She would begin planning a wedding that celebrated not just their love, but their triumph over those who tried to destroy it. She would continue building the life she'd always deserved but had never believed possible. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of a man who loved her strength rather than trying to weaken it, who supported her dreams rather than competing with them, who saw her clearly and chose to stay. For the first time in her life, she was home. Chapter 10. 2 years later, Deja stood in the bridal suite at the Swan House in Atlanta, studying her reflection in an antique mirror that had witnessed countless women preparing for their wedding days. But none of them, she was certain, had felt quite the way she felt in this moment, not nervous or anxious about the commitment she was making, but deeply, profoundly grateful for the journey that had brought her here. The dress she'd chosen was ivory silk, elegant but not traditional, with clean lines that reflected her personal style rather than bridal magazine expectations. At 46, she had no interest in playing the blushing bride. Instead, she was choosing to be exactly who she was, a successful businesswoman, a devoted mother, and a woman who'd learned that the best love stories began not with desperation, but with wholeness. "You look radiant," Tyra said, adjusting the simple pearl necklace that had been Deja's mother's. "Not like a woman getting married because she's supposed to, but like a woman choosing exactly the life she wants. Because that's exactly what I'm doing." Jordan appeared in the doorway, handsome in the deep blue suit he'd chosen, carrying a small bouquet of white roses. At 18 now, Jordan had grown into someone who carried himself with confidence and grace, shaped by watching his mother model strength and self-respect. "The photographer wants a few more shots," Jordan said, "and then it's time. Are you ready?" "I've been ready for 2 years. Maybe longer." The small ceremony was being held in the Swan House Gardens, with 50 guests who represented the life Deja had built rather than inherited. George's family had traveled from various parts of the country, embracing her with warmth that still surprised her. Her own small circle of friends and colleagues filled the remaining seats, along with Jordan's grandparents and a few cousins who'd never lost faith in her ability to find happiness. Notably absent was Julian, who declined the invitation with a stiff note that wished them well but made it clear he had no interest in celebrating their union. Andre Preston, having lost his primary client when Julian's business took a downturn after several poor decisions, had sent a gift but no reply to the invitation. Their absence felt like freedom rather than rejection. As the ceremony began, Deja walked down the garden path alone, not because she lacked someone to give her away, but because she was giving herself. The symbolism felt important. she was entering this marriage as a whole person, not as someone who needed completion. George waited for her at the altar, devastating in a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and kind eyes. But what took her breath away wasn't his appearance, it was the expression on his face as he watched her approach. Love, yes, but also respect, admiration, and the deep satisfaction of someone who knew exactly what he was gaining. The officiant they'd chosen was Rebecca Scott from the Sustainable Communities Foundation, ordained online specifically to perform their ceremony. She'd watched their relationship develop from professional collaboration to personal partnership, and her words reflected that journey. "Marriage is the ultimate architectural project," Rebecca began, her voice carrying warmth and wisdom. "Two people choosing to build something together that's stronger and more beautiful than anything they could create alone. Deja and George have already proven they know how to build something lasting, not just in business, but in life." When it came time for vows, George spoke first, his voice steady but emotional. "Deja, 2 years ago, you walked into my world and changed everything. Not because you needed rescuing, but because you were worth knowing. You've taught me that love doesn't require diminishing yourself to make someone else feel bigger. You've shown me what partnership looks like when both people are committed to each other's growth. I promise to love your strength, support your dreams, and stand beside you as we build whatever comes next." Deja's vows came from the deepest place in her heart. "George, you saw me when I was still learning to see myself clearly. You believed in my worth when I was still discovering it. You've shown me that love can be safe and exciting, stable and passionate, supportive and challenging all at once. I promise to love you with the same patience you've shown me, to build our life together with the same care you bring to everything you create, and to never stop being grateful for the man who taught me that I deserve to be cherished." When Rebecca pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared felt like both a celebration and a promise, sweet with accomplishment, passionate with possibility. The reception was held on the terrace of the Swan House, with string lights twinkling overhead and jazz music floating through the warm evening air. Deja danced with George to the same standard she'd been humming since their first coffee meeting, finally understanding why that melody had been surfacing from her subconscious. "Happy?" George asked, spinning her gently. "Completely. You?" "I've never been happier in my life." Jordan's toast during dinner brought tears to many eyes. "Most kids probably dream of their parents staying together forever," Jordan said, standing confidently before the gathered guests. "But I've learned something important watching my mom rebuild her life. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is start over. Mom taught me that it's better to be alone than to be with someone who doesn't see your worth. And George proved that when you do find someone who sees you clearly, everything becomes possible." He raised his glass toward the head table. "To Deja and George, for showing me what real love looks like." Later in the evening, as the celebration continued around them, Deja found herself standing with George on a quiet balcony overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The city sparkled below them, full of possibilities and dreams. "Can I tell you a secret?" she said, leaning against the railing. "Always. 3 years ago, when I was packing up the house after my divorce, I wasn't sure I'd ever feel genuinely happy again. I thought the best I could hope for was contentment. And now? Now I know the difference between settling for less and choosing more. Between being rescued and being seen. Between love that demands you be smaller and love that celebrates you being exactly who you are." George's arms encircled her from behind, and she leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "What do you see when you look at that skyline?" he asked. "Home. Future. Everything we're going to build together." "Speaking of building," George said, his voice carrying a tone that suggested he had something specific in mind. "I have a wedding present for you. We agreed no gifts. We agreed no traditional gifts. This is different." He handed her an envelope that felt substantial, like it contained more than just a card. Inside, she found architectural drawings, plans for a house that took her breath away. "George, what is this?" "Our home. If you want it." "I've been working on the design for months, incorporating everything I've learned about what makes you happy. A home office with southern exposure for your work. A workshop space where Jordan can experiment with sustainable design. Gardens where we can grow things together." The plans showed a house that was both elegant and comfortable, modern but warm, designed for the life they were building rather than for impressing others. "Where?" "I found a lot in Decatur. Close enough to the city for your business, quiet enough for the family life we want to build." "You want to build us a house?" "I want to build us a home. The place where we'll raise Jordan through his final years of high school, where we'll host holidays and celebrations, where we'll grow old together." The gift was so perfectly George, not flashy or expensive, but thoughtful and meaningful, designed to last a lifetime. "Yes," she said, studying the drawings with the eye of someone who understood both architectural vision and financial planning. "Yes, let's build our home." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Deja and George found themselves alone in the garden where they'd been married just hours earlier. The flowers released their evening fragrance into the warm air, and somewhere in the distance, the city hummed with life and possibility. "Mrs. Edwards," George said, testing out her new name. "I like the sound of that. Any regrets about changing it?" "None. McLean was my married name too, remember? Edwards feels like choosing my own identity rather than inheriting someone else's." They walked slowly through the garden, neither ready to leave this perfect day behind. Tomorrow, they would fly to Tuscany for their honeymoon, 2 weeks of exploring architecture, tasting wine, and simply being together without schedules or obligations. After that, they would return to Atlanta and begin the process of building their literal home. But tonight, Deja felt like she was already home, not in a place, but in the life she'd created through courage, patience, and the willingness to believe she deserved more than just survival. "George? Thank you." "For what?" "For waiting for me to be ready. For seeing who I could become instead of just who I was. For building something beautiful with me. Thank you for being worth waiting for. For teaching me what partnership really means. For showing me that the best love stories aren't about rescue, they're about recognition." As they made their way back toward the car that would take them to their hotel, Deja caught sight of their reflection in the Swan House windows, a couple who looked comfortable together, who moved with the synchronization of people who'd learned to share space and dreams. 3 years ago, she'd been a woman fleeing a marriage that had slowly destroyed her sense of self. Tonight, she was a woman who'd built herself back up and then chosen to share that rebuilt life with someone who valued her strength. The transformation felt miraculous, but she knew it hadn't been magic, it had been work. The work of healing, of learning to trust her own judgment, of refusing to settle for less than she deserved. The work of building a business, raising a child, and creating a life that reflected her values rather than someone else's expectations. Most importantly, it had been the work of learning to love herself enough to accept real love from someone else. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to build something lasting. But tonight, driving through the Atlanta streets toward their future, Deja felt the deep satisfaction of someone who'd chosen correctly, not just in marrying George, but in every decision that had brought her to this moment. She was exactly who she wanted to be. A successful businesswoman, a devoted mother, and a wife who'd entered marriage as an equal partner rather than a rescued victim. She was home. Chapter 11. 5 years later, Deja Edwards stood in the kitchen of the home George had designed for them, watching the morning sun stream through windows that perfectly captured the light at every time of day. The house had become everything they'd dreamed. Not just a place to live, but a true home where every corner reflected their shared values and individual personalities. Jordan, now 23 and home from law school for winter break, sat at the kitchen island reviewing job applications with environmental law firms. The environmental engineering degree he'd earned had led to a passion for environmental law, inspired partly by watching George and Deja's work on sustainable housing projects. "Mom, did you see this?" Jordan held up his laptop, showing an article from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. "Your housing project made the national news again. They're calling it a model for affordable housing across the country." Deja smiled, feeling the familiar warmth of professional accomplishment mixed with personal satisfaction. The sustainable housing development that had brought her and George together had grown into a network of communities across 3 states, proof that business success and social impact could thrive together. After their marriage, she had merged McLean Financial Strategies with George's architectural firm, creating Edwards and McLean Financial Development, a company that focused exclusively on projects that combined social responsibility with financial success. "Your stepfather's going to be insufferable when he sees that article," she said, using the term Jordan had chosen for George, not stepdad, which felt too casual, but stepfather, which acknowledged the formal nature of their relationship while honoring the genuine affection that had developed between them. "He deserves to be a little smug. The architecture in those communities is revolutionary." The sound of the front door opening announced George's return from his morning run, a habit he'd maintained throughout their marriage. He appeared in the kitchen, hair damp with sweat, cheeks flushed with exercise and cold air. "Good morning, family," he said, kissing Deja's cheek before ruffling Jordan's hair with the casual affection of someone who'd earned the right to act like a parent. "We made the news again," Jordan announced, turning the laptop toward George. As George read the article, his expression shifted from pleased to proud to something deeper, the satisfaction of someone who'd spent years building something meaningful. "5 years ago, this was just an idea," he said. "Now it's changing how people think about affordable housing. 5 years ago, I was just trying to prove I could succeed on my own," Deja added. "Now we're proving that success is better when it's shared." The doorbell interrupted their morning celebration, and Deja glanced at the clock in confusion. They weren't expecting anyone, and it was barely 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. George went to answer the door, returning with an expression that suggested confusion and mild concern. "There's someone here to see you," he told Deja. "Julian." The name fell into their peaceful morning like a stone into still water. Deja hadn't seen her ex-husband in over 2 years, not since Jordan's college graduation. Their communication had been limited to text messages about Jordan's schedule and the occasional email about financial matters related to their child. "He wants to talk to you alone," George continued. "Says it's important." Deja felt the familiar tension that Julian's presence always brought, but it was different now. Not the paralyzing anxiety of someone afraid of confrontation, but the alert wariness of someone prepared to defend their peace. "I'll talk to him on the front porch," she said. 5 minutes. George nodded, understanding without words that she needed to handle this herself, but his presence in the kitchen would be a comfort. Julian stood on their front porch looking older than his 51 years, his once commanding presence diminished by something that looked like genuine regret. The expensive suit was still there, but it hung differently on him, as if he'd lost weight or confidence or both. "Hello, Deja." "Julian. What do you want?" "To apologize." The words were so unexpected that Deja felt momentarily off balance. In all their years together, through marriage and divorce and custody battles, Julian had never apologized for anything. For what, specifically? For all of it. For the way I treated you during our marriage. For the custody battle. For trying to destroy your happiness because I couldn't stand seeing you succeed without me. Deja studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. What she saw instead was something she'd never seen before, genuine remorse. What brought this on? Julian was quiet for a moment, staring out at the neighborhood George had designed for them, tree-lined streets, thoughtfully designed homes, the kind of community that prioritized quality of life over ostentation. Therapy. A lot of therapy. After my business failed and Andre abandoned me, I had to take a hard look at the choices I'd made. The people I'd hurt. Your business failed? 3 years ago, just after Jordan's college graduation. Turns out that alienating your most talented partner and surrounding yourself with yes men isn't a sustainable business strategy. The bitter irony in his voice suggested he understood exactly how his own actions had led to his downfall. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Really? Deja considered the question honestly. Yes, I am. Not because I want to get back together or because I think you deserve my forgiveness, but because I never wanted you to suffer. I just wanted you to stop trying to make me suffer. I know. And I'm sorry for that. For trying to control you, for making you feel small, for using Jordan as a weapon against you. For not seeing what I had until it was too late. The apology was more comprehensive than anything she'd expected, but Deja found she felt nothing more than a distant sadness for the man who'd lost so much through his own choices. Thank you for saying that. But Julian, if you're here hoping for reconciliation, I'm not. I can see how happy you are. How good George is for you. How well Jordan is doing. He paused, his voice dropping. I can see everything I threw away because I was too insecure to let you shine. Then why are you here? Because I wanted you to know that I finally understand what you tried to tell me during our marriage. That partnership means supporting each other's success, not competing for it. That love means making someone feel bigger, not smaller. Deja felt something she hadn't expected, a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. I appreciate you telling me that. There's something else. Jordan's law school applications. I know you and George are covering the costs, but I want to contribute. Not because I think money will fix what I broke, but because it's my responsibility as Jordan's father. You'll need to discuss that with Jordan. He makes his own decisions about your relationship now. I know. And I know I have a lot of work to do to earn back his respect. But I want to try. Julian turned to leave, then paused. Deja? You were right to leave me. I wasn't capable of loving you the way you deserve then. I might not be capable of it now. But I want you to know that I finally see what I lost. After he left, Deja stood on the porch for a few minutes, processing the unexpected encounter. Inside, she could hear George and Jordan talking quietly in the kitchen, giving her space but remaining close enough to offer support if needed. When she returned to the kitchen, both of them looked up expectantly. Everything okay? George asked. Better than okay. Julian apologized. Actually apologized, for everything. Wow, Jordan said. I didn't think Dad was capable of that level of self-awareness. People can change, apparently. He wants to contribute to your law school costs. What do you think about that? Jordan asked. I think it's your decision. You're an adult, and you get to choose what kind of relationship you want with your father. And if I choose to let him try to be a better parent? Then I'll support that choice. George will too. George nodded, understanding without explanation that this development could only strengthen their family rather than threaten it. You know what this means, don't you? Jordan said, grinning. What? You win. Completely. You built a better life, found a better love, and even turned your ex-husband into a better person. Deja laughed, feeling the truth of Jordan's observation settle into her bones. She had won, but not in the way she'd once thought winning looked. She'd won by choosing herself, by building something authentic, by refusing to settle for less than she deserved. That afternoon, as they worked together in the garden George had designed behind their house, Deja reflected on the strange symmetry of Julian's visit. 5 years ago, she'd been afraid that his disapproval could somehow diminish what she'd built with George. Today, his approval felt irrelevant, nice to have, but not necessary for her sense of peace. Penny for your thoughts, George said, looking up from the roses he was pruning. Just thinking about how far we've all come. Julian becoming someone capable of apology. Jordan growing into someone who makes decisions based on his own values rather than fear of disappointing others. Us, building something that's strong enough to weather any storm. And you? How far have you come? Deja considered the question, looking around at the life they'd created together. The house that reflected their shared dreams. The garden where they'd planted things meant to bloom for decades. The successful business that proved she could thrive independently while choosing to share that success with someone who valued it. I've come full circle, I think. Back to the woman I was before I learned to doubt myself. But stronger now, because I know what I'm capable of surviving and building. That evening, they hosted a dinner party for friends and colleagues. The kind of gathering that had become a tradition in their home. Tyra was there with her new partner, a fellow attorney who treated her with the respect she'd always deserved. Rebecca Scott brought updates on their latest housing development. Jordan's friends from law school, home for winter break, filled the house with laughter and energy. As Deja moved through the evening, cooking, hosting, laughing with friends, she felt the deep satisfaction of someone who'd built exactly the life she wanted. Not the life she'd been told to want, not the life that looked impressive from the outside, but the life that felt authentic from the inside. Later, as they cleaned up together, Jordan approached her with an expression that suggested they'd been thinking about something important. "Mom, can I tell you something?" "Always. Watching you rebuild your life after the divorce, it taught me something important about love. That it's not supposed to cost you pieces of yourself. That the right person will want you to be more yourself, not less. That's a lesson it took me 44 years to learn. But you did learn it. And then you taught it to me. That's why I'm not scared of being alone, and I'm not desperate to be with someone. Because I know what real love looks like." Deja hugged her child, her remarkable, wise, strong child who'd grown up watching her mother model resilience and self-respect. "That might be the best thing you could have said to me. It's true. You and George, you're what I'll use as my standard for how I deserve to be loved." Later that night, as Deja and George lay in bed in the home he designed for them, she felt the particular contentment that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged. "Happy?" George asked, using the question that had become their nightly check-in. "Completely. You? More every day. Even after 5 years of marriage? Especially after 5 years of marriage. I know who you are in every mood, every season, every challenge. And I love all of it." The simple declaration carried the weight of years spent proving it through actions rather than just words. George had loved her through business stress and family drama, through Jordan's teenage years and Julian's custody battle, through the ordinary challenges of building a life together. "I love you too. All of you. The architect, the craftsman, the stepfather, the husband who still brings me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings." "Speaking of Sunday mornings," George said, pulling her closer, "what do you want to do with our first Sunday of winter break? Jordan will be here for 3 weeks. Family things. Lazy mornings, cooking together, maybe working on that puzzle Jordan brought home. Normal, ordinary, perfect family things. Sounds ideal." As sleep began to claim them both, Deja felt grateful for the ordinary magic of her life. She'd learned that the best love stories weren't about dramatic rescues or fairy tale transformations. They were about two whole people choosing each other consistently, building something beautiful together through patience and respect and the daily decision to prioritize each other's happiness. She'd built a business that mattered, raised a child who understood their own worth, and created a marriage based on partnership rather than possession. She'd learned to trust her own judgment, to fight for what she deserved, and to believe that her happiness was not only possible but necessary. Most importantly, she'd learned that love, real love, didn't require her to be smaller or quieter or less ambitious. Real love celebrated her strength, supported her dreams, and grew stronger when she grew stronger. She was exactly who she'd always had the potential to be, successful, loved, and free. Epilogue. 7 years after their wedding, 10 years after their first coffee meeting, Deja Edwards stood in the boardroom of Edwards and McLean Financial Development, the company she and George had formed to focus exclusively on sustainable community projects. The wall behind her displayed a map dotted with pins representing 37 communities they developed across the Southeast, each one proof that social responsibility and financial success could thrive together. The Atlanta project exceeded all projections, she told the room full of investors and community leaders. 93% occupancy, 15% appreciation in home values, and a waiting list of families who want to join the community. More importantly, we're seeing the social outcomes we hoped for: improved educational performance, reduced crime, increased community engagement. George sat at the far end of the conference table, his hair now more silver than brown, his architect's hand still steady as he took notes. At 53, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent a decade proving that beautiful design and social impact could coexist. The presentation concluded with enthusiastic questions and several new commitments for funding future projects. As the room emptied, Deja and George found themselves alone with the satisfaction of work well done. 37 communities, George said, studying the map. Sometimes I can't believe we've built all this. We've built more than communities. We've built a legacy. The word felt appropriate. Their work would outlast them, providing homes for thousands of families and serving as a model for development that prioritized people over profit. Speaking of legacy, George said, pulling out his phone to show her a text message. Jordan passed the bar exam. Deja's face broke into a smile that felt like sunshine. At 28, Jordan had completed law school and was starting his career with an environmental law firm, continuing the family tradition of work that mattered. We need to celebrate. Dinner at the house this weekend? Already planned. I invited Tyra and Rebecca, and Jordan's bringing his partner. Jordan's partner was someone he'd met in law school, another environmental lawyer with shared values and the kind of gentle strength that reminded Deja of George. Watching Jordan navigate his first serious relationship, she felt proud of the standards her child had set, clearly influenced by witnessing a marriage based on mutual respect and support. That evening, as they drove home to the house that had become the center of their world, Deja reflected on the strange mathematics of happiness. 10 years ago, she'd thought losing her marriage meant losing everything. Now she understood that losing the wrong relationship had made space for the right one. Deja, George said as they pulled into their driveway, there's something I want to show you. Another surprise project? Something like that. He led her to his workshop, now expanded to include a section where Jordan had experimented with sustainable design during college. On his workbench sat a wooden box, similar to the jewelry box he'd made for Jordan years earlier but larger, more elaborate. What is this? A memory box. For us. I thought we could start collecting things we want to remember, photos, letters, ticket stubs from our travels. Evidence of the life we've built together. The box was beautiful, crafted with the same attention to detail George brought to everything he created. But what made Deja's throat tighten with emotion was the small plaque inlaid on the lid, for Deja and George, because love that honors lasts forever. George, it's perfect. Open it. Inside, cushioned in soft felt, lay a single item. The sketch George had drawn of her during their first coffee meeting, the one that had shown her how he saw her strength and grace before she'd fully seen it herself. Our beginning, he said simply. That night, they made love with the passion of newlyweds and the intimacy of long-married partners who'd learned each other's rhythms and desires. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Deja felt the deep peace of someone who'd chosen correctly not just once, but every day for 10 years. Any regrets? George asked, using a question that had become their anniversary tradition. None. You? Only that it took us 44 and 46 years to find each other. Maybe we needed those years to become people worthy of what we built together. Maybe we did. As sleep claimed them, Deja thought about the woman she'd been when she first walked into that conference room 10 years ago. Successful but guarded, intelligent but doubting her own judgment, strong but believing she had to choose between strength and love. Now she knew better. The best love didn't require choosing between independence and partnership. It enhanced both. The right person didn't make you smaller to fit into their world, they helped you build a world big enough for both of you to flourish. She'd learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past but about refusing to let it define the future. That success meant more than professional achievement, it meant building a life aligned with your values. That love, real love, was patient and respectful and committed to each other's growth. Most importantly, she'd learned that she was worthy of all of it, the success, the respect, the love that honored rather than diminished her. Have you ever had to choose between comfort and courage and love? What would you tell someone who's afraid to leave a relationship that's slowly destroying their spirit? How do you know when you found someone who sees your true worth? Outside their bedroom windows, Atlanta sparkled in the darkness, a city full of dreams and second chances. Inside, surrounded by the evidence of a life built on mutual respect and genuine partnership, Deja Edwards slept the sleep of someone who'd found her way home. She'd walked away from love that tried to control her and walked toward love that celebrated her. She'd built a business that mattered, raised a child who understood their own worth, and created a marriage that proved partnership was possible. She'd discovered that the best love stories weren't about rescue or completion, they were about recognition. Two whole people seeing each other clearly and choosing to build something beautiful together. She was exactly who she'd always had the potential to be, successful, cherished, and completely, authentically free. Thank you for joining Deja and George's journey of healing and hope. Your presence in our Dear Love Diaries family makes these stories possible. Like this video if it touched your heart, subscribe for more stories of love conquering fear, and share in the comments your own moments of choosing courage over comfort. Tomorrow, we'll share another story of hearts finding their way home. Until then, remember, you are worthy of love that lifts you higher, not love that tears you down.